Welcome to our very first Housing Community Summit podcast special. This is a first for the Housing Community Summit. We wanted to be able to dive deep into the topics that really matter to the sector in a way that goes beyond the panel sessions and the great presentations that we've seen. This podcast is brought to you from Grit and Polish by Perfect Storm. I'm flying solo today as my fellow co-host Alison Inman is busy, so no pressure. And her words are ringing in my ears. For those of you who know Alison, she said, make sure it's not all polish and no grit with her absence today. I'm Amanda Leonard. I'm the founder and CEO of Perfect Storm. And I've got a little help later today from our fantastic sponsors who have helped make this podcast possible. Housemark, the UK's leading housing sector data and insight company, Boyden Executive Search Consultancy, and 3C award-winning consultants in data, digital and tech. I'm joined this morning by Emma Haddad, who is the CEO of St Mungo. So welcome, Emma.
Thank you.
Emma's going to be discussing homelessness and the crisis facing us on temporary accommodation. As Emma and I were saying earlier, a very broad topic, but I'm sure we'll do that justice. Emma's been at St Mungo since 2022, haven't you, Emma? And prior to this, worked in central government for almost 2 decades. So welcome, Emma.
Thank you so much.
We're obviously talking about this really important topic. When you get beyond all the policy announcements, you get beyond the horrific statistics around children and older persons and everybody really affected by homelessness. But just give us that snapshot of your experience at a human level.
Yeah, and it's getting worse out there and has been for a few years now. So it's heartbreaking actually. So I have the privilege of leading St Mungo's, and in that role I go out every week, make sure I catch up with one or more of our services, our hostels, our supported accommodation, chat to the teams, chat to any residents and clients who might be around. And listening to the client stories of how they might have ended up on the streets or ended up, coming into the sports at Mungo's is always heartbreaking. There's always trauma and things that have happened, or many things that have happened that have led to them, ending up homeless.
And presumably some surprising stories as well. Sometimes we, kind of assume that we know how people landed there.
Yeah, absolutely. And I realise every day you can't make assumptions because there's no one person who ends up homeless. Everyone's got their own individual story, and you could be happily working in the city with a good job and a great relationship, and something happens and you're on the streets and never would have thought it would happen to you. You've got people who've got years of complexity and trauma and all sorts of things that have happened along the way, but the system has failed them over and over and over again, and they've ended up where they've ended up. And then chatting to the teams, it's stark at the moment how hard it is to help people, and I don't mean because of the help that they personally, individually need. I mean because of the system,
yes,
which is so clogged up, for want of a better word. So it's harder and harder to help people off the street, those people who are literally at the sharp end of homelessness and are sleeping rough on the pavements, because there's less and less temporary accommodation to help people into. And then it's harder and harder to help people out of temporary accommodation into something more settled, because there's such a shortage of housing, and in particular affordable housing, or the right type of housing to suit people's needs. And so you've just got these bottlenecks everywhere, and the teams are used to helping people and helping people out of homelessness, but when there aren't those options, that's
and do
hard.
they almost feel like they're playing this game of whack-a-mole where you're just kind of taking these temporary...
Exactly.
And I mean, obviously, we haven't got time in a 30-minute podcast to talk about all of the systemic change that needs to happen, but what are the main things driving those blockages in the system?
Yeah, so housing is obviously the biggie, and it's not just any old housing, it's the right type of housing, whether that might be supported if people need a bit of help before they become totally independent, and the right rent, the right affordability. And rents at the lowest end are in really high demand,
yes,
and really, really short supply. But then, the roof over someone's head is fundamentally important, but it's not just the roof over someone's head. And in particular, the clients who we work with in St Mungo's often have that complexity of need. In fact, we're seeing people with more and more higher complexity of need. And so just a roof over someone's head is not going to help them necessarily end their homelessness for good. And our strapline is end homelessness and help people rebuild their lives. So, you need those support services if someone has mental health issues or care needs assessment, you need the statutory services, you need the support if there's addictions or, you know, or if there's domestic abuse. And that's not for St Mungo's because we're not specialists in everything. It's, you know, linking up with either statutory partners or other organisations. But everyone's under those pressures, you know, it's really hard sometimes to get people the support they need.
I mean, that capacity and that whole system that supports, I mean, are you seeing enough collaboration between those various agencies and organisations like yourself, housing providers? Are you seeing enough of that?
So there are brilliant examples of it, and where it works well, it works really, really well.
And can you give us an example of something that's resonated with you?
Yeah, I mean, I often hear my wonderful team down in Bournemouth tell me, you know, they've just got such a good model of multi-agency working, great relationships. There's the case conferencing that goes on to try and help individuals and work out what people need. So you're not just shunting somebody from service to service or, you know, asking them to do the joining up. We're joining up for the person and trying to get them what they need. And, you know, regular contact between the agencies, the organisations, trust, relationships that have been built over time. So that's great. It works, you know, and you can see the outcomes. You can see what that does for people.
And is that a shift for you organisationally? So you're becoming more that nucleus, that coordinator and conductor of things?
I'm not sure we necessarily lead it in Bournemouth. I think we're one of the actors. I think maybe we've led it over time, and there's, you know, it shifts. But I mean, it's something we push hard just to make it work. We don't have to be the one doing the you know, the overarching leadership, but it's got to be that collaborative effort. Where it works less well is, you know, it's not so joined up and people aren't talking, and, you know, it's a bit chaotic. But it's almost not a surprise because teams are under such pressure. You know, you particularly look at the local authority housing teams where, you know, got brilliant people just doing their best but under such pressure because their waiting lists are huge. They've got people knocking at their door who are homeless that night, you know, and it's like, where do you start? They're firefighting.
They're having to react. React
exactly,
constantly.
Exactly.
And where the joining up is not working as well, what do you think is causing that? Is it that just everybody's too busy?
Yeah, I think you've got to somehow help people be able to step back and just have that headspace for a minute and to say, actually, we could probably be doing this better if we worked slightly differently. So just pause and breathe. But it's really hard because you've got the daily pressures in front of you, which are real people, let's face it.
And stepping back means the to-do list is getting bigger, and
you know, so it's tough. But I think you know, if people can even give themselves a day to do that and just refocus slightly, it's probably worth it.
And what made you, just sticking with that kind of personal theme, because you know, this is obviously an area very close to your heart, what made you make the move from central government into this role?
So I was in central government for nearly 2 decades, but the second decade was very much in delivery of services. I was running the asylum system, people fleeing and claiming asylum. I was running refugee resettlement programmes. Almost always working with people with various complexity, vulnerabilities, needing support, usually having a housing need. So it wasn't actually a fundamental change. It feels like more of a continuation rather than a complete shift.
You're just doing it in a different role in a different place.
Yeah, but you know, service delivery, focusing on vulnerable people, leading at scale, dispersed teams, geographically dispersed teams, trying to do our best with limited funds, processes that can always be improved, putting people at the heart, the focus of that process, that system. There's similarities too, right?
Yeah, definitely. And kind of putting your government hat back on, I guess, you know, the housing sector and this conference, you know, has this vibe now of cautious optimism. I think there is caution because there are risks around delivery, and obviously there still isn't enough capacity in the system. But you know, how do you feel the impact will be on your work of some of the announcements that we've seen in the spending review? Well,
look, the 39 billion going into affordable housing is absolutely huge. I mean, that can be absolutely transformational, and that cannot but impact positively on the homelessness crisis that we're seeing. It has to, because housing is a big part of it. It would be nice to see a homelessness minister. We've just lost one. It would be nice to see a homelessness strategy. We've not got one yet, right? So there's still work for the government to do, which we're trying to support them
Are you trying to lobby for that?
No, absolutely. And I sit around the expert group that the government runs. So we're around the table. It's a shame, you know, they've had a resignation, so we need that post filled. But, you know, I'm coming from Whitehall, I guess I'm very much of the view that this is not just on the government. We've all got to play our part, and let's, you know, back to the collaboration. Let's partner. Let's do it collectively. And I think there is still that optimism that we're all pulling in the same direction. We've all got to just, pull together to try and stop the tide of what's going on in homelessness at the moment.
Yeah, definitely.
And it can be done. It's been done before, right?
Yeah.
So.
And do you feel as well that maybe housing associations and local authorities are working closely enough together on the challenges around temporary accommodation? Because we are seeing some great examples of collaboration where void properties are being used for temporary accommodation. I mean, obviously that's very much in the category that you described as the kind of the reactive solution. But do you think there's scope? I know some people have mentioned that there's a lot more scope to just even join up those two elements, the housing association, the local authority, and the eye-watering cost of temporary accommodation.
Yeah, the more we can do of that, obviously, the better.
Yeah.
Again, it's about that headspace, isn't it? Because the amount of money that local government is spending on TA is eye-watering, isn't it?
Yeah,
it's just,
it is.
So they haven't got the capacity, financial capacity, let alone the headspace, to just start to shift. But they need to just start to shift, even in a small way, into kind of upstream and prevention and trying to wean us off TA.
Yeah.
So to speak. If we can find creative ways of doing that, and it will need local government, housing associations, charities, voluntary sector, government. If we can find ways to do that, that's how you gradually shift the whole system more upstream and prevent people falling into homelessness in the first place.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
And you obviously play a really vital role in your organisation around changing that conversation and changing that narrative. Just give us a flavour of what priorities are on your plate strategic-wise. We're trying to do some interesting stuff in the prevention space, for example. So, because so much of what we do is when people are already in crisis, they've already become homeless, they're already on the street, which is so important. You can't suddenly turn that off, that support off. But you'd like to stop them getting there in the first place. So we're doing some interesting stuff, trying to start doing more upstream, more in prevention. So who are the people presenting at their housing department at their local council who are saying, I'm going to be homeless in a couple of weeks' time, I need help now. And that's where you really need the housing options teams to have some headspace to say, actually, I need to help you, not just the person who's already homeless, because I can prevent your homelessness, but they need a bit of space. But that's where we're stepping in and saying, right, we refer to us. We've got some projects up and running with some support from the GLA in London specifically. We've got some bed spaces. We can get someone into one of those beds so they're not on the street. We can intensively help them at that point. And you're
doing
doing that
solution
before they become homeless.
Exactly.
Yeah. So it's very much prevention.
Exactly. Yeah. The other area where we work is prisons. It's entirely prevention, because if you can get someone's house, either they help them hold on to their house while they're in on a short sentence, or have something for them to go out to when they're released, and they're not released onto a pavement, got more likelihood of them not reoffending, and everything working out a little bit better. But that's core prevention work, which is fundamentally important again. So the more we can, again, just shifting upstream, people coming out of the asylum system at the moment. You get Home Office funded accommodation while you're going through the process. Once you've got your decision, you've got, sadly, again, back to 28 days. It was 56 days for a bit, but only 28 days until you have to leave that accommodation. The quicker we can get in and help somebody, because otherwise they're coming out of the asylum system and we're picking people up on the pavement again, you know. And they've got leave to remain in the UK.
Yes.
Again, it's that transition point.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to cause homelessness. It doesn't have to. If you step in and do something different, and it's very hard, again, because probably sometimes those doing something different things require a bit of cash.
Yes.
But it's so much cheaper to help at that point rather than when somebody is
And are
homeless.
you finding economically you can cope with that? Because obviously it's a really compelling business case, isn't it? As you've said, it costs less to focus on prevention strategies than it does to deal with the problem further downstream. Your whole point, which is really resonating with me, is this whole upstream approach and upstream strategy. But, do you have the resources you need to do what you're doing in prevention?
And sadly we don't, and we could do so much more. But, we're, St Mungo's specifically is, largely funded by contracts from local government. We run services on behalf of local government. And again, back to the local government funding issue, so much is going on TA, they haven't got the money. Now, a bit did go in the spending review on prevention, specifically new funding for prevention-related work. So that's where we need to focus our efforts. How to use that in the best way for the biggest impact.
And is that something you're involved in? Is that
teams are?
Yes.
Yeah. We're discussing exactly with local authorities how again how we can help them design and co-create and that kind of thing where it can work well. Where we've got some. Where we've got some experience of what works best, we try and feed it in. And what's not worth investing in, let's put our money where when it's in short supply, let's put it where it's going to be the most effective.
And do you have any data on that? I mean, have you started to measure the impact of some of those prevention services?
Yeah, off the top of my head, I can't give you figures.
No, don't worry.
But yeah, absolutely, we know the ones that. You can see. Yeah, I suppose it's almost measuring an avoidance of homelessness.
Yes.
It's kind of almost measuring a negative that you've avoided, isn't it?
But it's still
positive outcomes.
I mean, you could almost quantify that, couldn't you, in terms of both cost and human impact as well.
Exactly.
What would you like to see? I mean, we're at a conference today, obviously talking about housing. What would you like to see from councils and housing associations in supporting you on preventing homelessness? What would you be calling
The biggest
for?
thing I think we can all do here, because it is it's a housing conference, it's predominantly housing, although there's quite a lot going on being discussed on homelessness this time around, which is great to see. But for that link to be made, I think it's really important that we see homelessness as part of housing and part of a housing strategy. Again, back to the government that's going to come out with a housing strategy. I fundamentally hope that homelessness is it's at least a mention or a chapter in that strategy, because they're not two separate things.
No.
They're the same. They're all linked, and and for housing, those in housing to realise it's not to remember it's not just the roof and the bed. It's a whole host of things that go with that roof and that bed to help end or avoid homelessness.
I mean, do you think we've almost become sort of numb to the eye-watering data and statistics? In housing, the narrative, we're constantly talking, aren't we, about specific challenges that to your point right at the start of this podcast has this enormous human cost. Do you think we're almost in danger of being in that space where we've almost normalised some of these?
It's a risk, isn't it? I hope not. I mean, but when you walk down some of the streets in Westminster or in Victorian London, and they're just tent after tent after tent, you do find yourself walking past. But it makes my stomach lurch. I'm not ignoring it.
No.
But maybe we have. It's just back to what it looked like 30 years ago, and we're all just thinking it's too big a problem. But we can't let that happen. I suppose, can we? That's the answer. Otherwise it will become normalised, and it becomes too difficult, and it becomes something that we all just expect to see on our streets. I mean, in 21st century Britain, homelessness should not exist.
No.
And there will always be people who fall through the safety net in society, or have had an awful childhood and something happens and goes wrong. But it's how quickly we can support them and pick them up, with that safety net, I guess. And not accepting that it's just normal to see people sleeping on the streets, even for a night, let alone for 3 years or for 10 years. We just can't in 21st century Britain. So,
of course. And are you seeing a difference in the causes of homelessness and the breadth of people coming through? Are you seeing that shift?
Yeah,
as economic challenges bite.
Yeah, definitely. I think if you talk to my teams who've been doing it for a long time, doing this work for a long time, they would say, your traditional clients who we were helping, if I can put it like that, were the ones with huge complexity, decades of trauma or years and years of complexity and things that have happened. We still support those people and see those people. But we also see people, like I mentioned, they're just something has happened. Actually, you never expected it to happen to them. Or people who are giving up their house to sleep in their car because they can't afford the commute to work. They're still in employment. Lots of our clients are still in employment where traditionally they might not have been a few years back. But the employment, their job is not enough to cover their rent now because rents have soared.
So it's a cost of living driven homelessness. Yeah. And there aren't really signs that that's going to kind of improve quickly, are there?
No, and that's where where with employment it's really hard. When people are on benefits, that's where we need local housing allowance to be increased so that it covers enough rents. That's something we're really pushing for. You need the benefit cap to be lifted, perhaps. You need, enough going into the welfare system that supports people even in employment and they don't work against each other. Those kind of things where the system actually supports people to be able to move towards more independence. But
again, I mean, what I'm hearing loud and clear all the way through this is it's that joining up. joining up of policy, collaborating, multi-agency response, and as you said, preventing and working more closely upstream.
Exactly.
One of the big topics we've been talking about here, both on the podcast and at the conference, is the important role that resident engagement plays. Obviously, in housing consumer regulation, that has now been heightened, which has been really welcome by the sector. How do you engage with your clients? How do you engage with the people that you're helping to ensure that your services are really meeting needs beyond that immediate crisis?
So client involvement is a huge and very important golden thread that runs right through St Mungo's, and it's not just a strapline or a thing we talk about. You can really see it and you can really feel it, and it happens at different levels. So we've got resident meetings that go on in the hostel that people are living in, and they can report things that they want changed, or say they want a film night put on, or whatever, but they're involved locally. Centrally, we have a client advisory board where various clients, or sometimes ex-clients, who want to give back and they're in then in a space to contribute, meet almost like a shadow board.
Yes, yeah.
And they're involved in the decision making of the organisation, and they
feed
up to the board
as well.
Exactly right. Yeah. We do an annual client feedback survey. We have different client ambassadors telling their stories. They're so powerful listening to people's lived experience, and that's really feeds into trying to constantly improve our services based on what people are experiencing. Yeah. And it also feeds into our influencing work with, for example, central government. So we have the delivery of services, we have the influencing. They're our two missions, but they're totally joined up because we do our influencing based on what people are experiencing, and what we can see is supporting people, and what we can see is working against people. And when they tell us their experiences, and we can amplify those voices, basically.
And just give us a flavour of what they're telling you. What are those clients telling you that's then shaping your strategy to influence?
Yeah, so it would be things like we're seeing people come out of the asylum system and they weren't given long enough to find accommodation, so they ended up with a period of homelessness. So we're pushing for give people longer, or help us come in and support earlier on, so they don't need to be homeless in between. Or we know that clients want to work more, but while they're on housing benefit, they will start to lose their housing benefit quickly the more they work. So there's a massive financial disincentive to go into employment when you're on housing benefit. So we're pushing really hard because we want people to be able to work. The government wants people to be able to work, and you don't want people just sitting around in supported accommodation not being able to work, because it's great for their mental health if they can, and their income and all sorts of things. But when you've got two things again working against each other, we see that from real client experiences. We're pushing hard on things like that.
And how optimistic are you feeling about the agenda? And you're talking about influencing government on these really important areas. How optimistic are you feeling about that agenda? Where do you think we are on the continuum?
So I always stay optimistic, because you've got
you
to have
seem
hope.
really optimistic.
Well, if you don't, it can be all really quite hard and depressing.
I'm sure,
especially seeing people's individual stories. So I have to stay optimistic. And but I am optimistic about our influencing work, because we see the results of it, and that's not just us influencing. That's the sector, and collaboration again. And we're heard, and we make things happen, and it improves outcomes for people. So that's fantastic. I'm also realistic that money is tight in central government finances, isn't it? In public finances, we see us influence and things change, and then sometimes get retracted, like with that asylum move-on period at the moment. Politics gets in the way, doesn't it? And public pressures, and that all of the kind of rhetoric and protests and stuff going on at the moment, they all have an impact. So we need government to hold their nerve as well, and when it thinks it's doing the right thing, not to backtrack. So,
and are you nervous about that kind of political shift we're seeing at the moment?
Yeah, because it will have a worse impact on people. No, absolutely. So we'll just keep giving the stories, and we'll keep amplifying the voices, and we'll keep telling people what we're seeing, and hopefully push for the changes that are needed. But generally hopeful, because I think the conversations I've had with central and local government actors is, we all want to solve this. Yes. We've all never seen these numbers off the chart and record highs, and it's tragic and it's heartbreaking, as we started by saying. So I think people, the outcome we're all trying to get to is the same. So
Yeah.
hopefully there's ways.
Yeah, and we're seeing more focus on that now, aren't we? Which is a really good thing. We're just going to wrap up shortly, but I just want to ask you if you could change one thing about England's housing system overnight. What would it be?
Only one.
One thing, and you can overrun. Don't worry.
Or
you can change more than one. I'll let you have more than one. Yeah.
Push three into one.
Yeah. No, you can do. You can do three. You go ahead and have three. Yeah, you deserve it with all the great work.
That's very kind. One thing about the housing system. It's got to be affordability. Yeah, just more at that affordable, more supply at that affordable end.
Yeah.
That would just suddenly open up more options for people.
Yeah.
So it's a volume thing, but it's a volume at affordable prices for for people on the lower incomes, because that's what's in such short supply at the moment. Make a massive difference. Huge
and you
difference.
feel that could be one of those absolute turning point moments
I
that
do.
would shift the upstream conversation.
If it's at scale. So, even with the 39 billion going into affordable homes, we've got to make sure there's enough social homes in there, and the sector we call for 90,000 a year. That's a huge volume, but we've not heard that reflected back by government as a commitment yet. So it's got to be at scale, because the smaller numbers will make a difference to a few people, but it's not going to be game changing.
And I mean that's where all the different policy announcements come into play together, don't they? Rent stability, rent certainty, all of those things that will also help enable that. We're actually talking about that next, the kind of the economic landscape. We're talking to a CEO from Carbon Homes, Paul Fidderman. He's going to be talking to us about his view, and let's hope he shares your optimism, Emma.
Got to stay optimistic.
Yeah, you have. I agree completely. And there is clearly some amazing work being done. So thanks for joining us, Emma. It's been great to talk to you.
Yeah, no, lovely to chat. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.